Comfrey, the cure that stood the test of time. Comfrey was essential to men in the front lines of work and war. It aided the young and the old. So great was its healing powers that ancient philosophers and New Age scientists have written extensively of the respect that it deserves. Comfrey is used for so many conditions that the list would be never-ending. Welcome to the wonderful world of Comfrey and its many, many uses. Comfrey is related to the culinary flowering herb, borage, and the two are very similar in appearance. It has oblong dark green leaves and a hairy stem, lined with fine bristles. Their blue, white, yellow, or purple flowers are almost indistinguishable from its cousin. It originated in Siberia and Asia Minor. In no time, its incredible medicinal value spread far and wide across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It was so integral to society that it was grown in the gardens of kings and paupers alike. It was commonly referred to by names like knitbone, boneset, bruisewort, and gum plant. These nicknames should give you some indication of what this magnificent healer was used for. So let's get right into the root that treated nobility and peasants like equals. The first written mention can be traced back to around 3,000 years ago by Greek philosophers. But even then, it had long since spread and been cultivated in Europe, Asia, and North Africa, both for medicine and intercropped with other grazing plants for animal fodder. Humans used it almost exclusively for medicinal purposes, and only on occasion did they add it to soups and stews. The Greeks were the ones to distinguish 34 separate varieties. Symphantum officinale, the botanical name, is derived from the Greek words for grow or bind together and plant. And the more commonly used name, Comfrey, derives from the Latin words for the uniting of bones, very appropriate given the plant's main medicinal application, bone healing. The Slavic and Celtic people attributed Comfrey to religious deities of love, fertility, and healing, and the Brits believed that it protected travelers from robbers and attacks. They would place 2 leaves in their pocket while they were on the road, or they would wrap money in comfrey leaves, believing that it protected their hard-earned money from thieves. Comfrey root was used predominantly for internal injuries and conditions, broken bones, internal bleeding, stomach ulcers, and even to treat bloody sputum commonly occurring with deep chest infections and tuberculosis. The root has a gummy, almost glue-like consistency when it's in its concentrated form. It's these congealing capabilities that are thought to fuse broken bones together and form a protective layer over wounds inside the body. This line of thinking led to its use as a popular treatment in this gluey prepared way to cover outward scrapes and bruises too. Greek and Roman armies never traveled without huge supplies of dried root when going to war, and as we'll learn a little later in this video, the ancients were onto something. They worked it in with tallow, beeswax, and pounded the leaves and roots into paste, and used it to remove old scars and to offer relief to arthritic joints and torn ligaments. Scrapes and bruises, burns and rashes, almost any skin condition found relief under Comfrey's applications. Tea was prepared to treat bowel and urinary problems like hemorrhoids, ulcers, and urinary tract and yeast infections. Women were also prescribed comfrey tea after childbirth to encourage internal healing and to lessen postpartum bleeding after labor. And finally, cold infusions rinsed out strained and irritated eyes. It became a common aid in coal mines and on construction sites in later years when the industrial era had taken its hold on the world and workmen were working long hours in dusty and dry conditions. And once colonization began to fully take hold, comfrey was among the first seeds that were brought along on ships to inhabit the New World. It was considered as much of a survival crop as wheat and barley were. Native Americans and the peoples of South Africa took a particular interest in the magical herb. Today you can still buy tubs of comfrey salve in many African countries. This salve is used to relieve achy muscles and sore joints, especially in sportsmen and the elderly. and little tins of more concentrated salves are sold in grocery stores for people to rub on their chests, necks, and beneath their noses to clear congestion. You would be hard-pressed to find a household without a tub or tin tucked away in a drawer. And women, especially mothers, have it in their purses as commonly as they would carry their wallets and tissues. And the science says it's all based on fact. Numerous studies have been performed in both mice and humans. It was found that comfrey contains allantoin, which does indeed promote cell growth and healing in all the tissues of the body. Studies don't just confirm its effectiveness, it proved comfrey's superiority when compared to prescription drugs for inflammation, muscle and joint soreness, and arthritis. Every time it was put to the test, Comfrey came out at the top of clinical trials. They proved that its astringency qualities promote coagulation of the blood, reducing profuse bleeding. So far, the historical uses for comfrey were being backed up by modern science. It's around this leg of a clinical study that scientists concluded that comfrey had an overall repair-inducing and anti-inflammatory effect on the entire body. They confirmed that it was an excellent pain reliever for almost any kind of wound, sprain, or organ. Their studies were mostly based on topical usage, and they were just starting to look into the possibilities of internal application. And here is where they hit a snag. They found small amounts of pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which can have serious effects on the liver when taken in large doses and over long periods of time, though that is true of almost every medication out there. The scientific community is split in two on the discovery. On the one hand, we have those that believe that any risk at all, no matter how minor, is to be avoided. And on the other side of the argument, we have professionals who are desperately advocating to continue studies into comfrey, since they believe that any medication taken in excess is dangerous, and comfrey's immense range of applications deserves a more in-depth look. But at least for now, both sides can agree completely that its topical use is perfectly safe, and in most cases, better than anything else concocted in a lab and sold over a counter. Sunburn, joints, muscles, ligaments, sore throats, burns, old scars, psoriasis, the list is almost never-ending. Whether you agree or disagree on its internal usage, rest assured, external application has been run through every set of experimental conditions imaginable, and comfrey passed with flying colors. While we wait for science to come to some sort of conclusion on when to continue their examination of comfrey, let's get into the many ways in which this herb can be prepared. Oil. Comfrey oil might be the simplest method to prepare comfrey, and in order to make salves or lotions, you'll need to make the oil first. You can use any kind of oil. Coconut and olive oils are ideal, and rendered fat works exceptionally well too. Start by stuffing a jar full of dried comfrey leaves, filling your jar about halfway. Pour your chosen oil into the jar until you reach the brim. If your bottles are sealed tight, you can store your jars at room temperature. But if you have any hesitations about spoilage, they store just fine in the fridge. After about 2 weeks, strain out the plant matter and rebottle the oil. And now we get to salves and creams. Beeswax is best to use for salves, and tallow works better for creams. Beeswax hardens quite a bit when it's cooled off, but the infused oil you'll be adding will keep it at the ideal consistency to spread by hand on your skin. Tallow is softer, and since its main ingredient is fat, it offers a great amount of benefit to skin all on its own already. It's easily spreadable, so it's the perfect product to use in creams that are better suited to cover wider areas. But both methods require the same steps, no matter which you prefer to make. On the stove, at low heat, melt your wax or tallow until it liquefies. For every pint of liquid, use 2 tablespoons of infused oil, or 3 to 4 tablespoons for every quart. Stir it well and pour it into your jars to set and cool off completely before closing the lids. Decoctions. For every cup of water, use 2 teaspoons of dried root. Allow the infusion to simmer for 15 minutes and strain out the root. If you don't want to drink your decoction, it can be used as a mouth gargle for bleeding gums, mouth ulcers, sore throats, tooth infections, and cold sores on the inside of the mouth. Tea. Tea can be had hot or cold. Cold infusions are better for loosening mucus and encouraging phlegm to thin enough to dislodge more easily, and with less strain when coughing. But warm infusions are faster to prepare and are more often used for internal wounds and bleeding. Either way, you'll need 2 teaspoons of dried root for every cup of water. If you're using the cold method, let it stand for 6 to 8 hours before straining out the plant matter. And for warm tea, 10 to 15 minutes should be sufficient before straining. Poultices. You can use both the leaves and roots to create poultices. To save you a great deal of effort, you're more than welcome to use a blender instead of a stone and pumice. Depending on how much you want, add your fresh leaves and roots to your blender and add water little by little until you have a paste consistency. This can be used as is. It can be dabbed on bruises or achy muscles and joints. Or, to avoid a mess, apply it to the affected area and cover it with a bandage overnight. A nifty trick for a cold compress is to scoop the paste onto a cloth, press it flat, and slide it into a Ziploc bag. Place it in your freezer. Take the stiff and frozen cloth out of the plastic bag when you need it, to lay over sore muscles and joints, or over burns and irritated skin. Burns and sunburns will find a great deal of relief from the cold and the Comfrey working together. This cold method is also a good option for torn ligaments and overworked muscles, when heat compresses aren't advised. Comfrey extracts and oils are commonly sold over the counter and online. They can be used in place of homemade oils if you don't have a fresh or dried supply of Comfrey on hand. It is, however, not advised to use these for oral applications, since most essential oils use preservatives that might not be safe to ingest. Comfrey originated far north of the equator, and it is better adapted to cooler climates. This annual usually hibernates in winter and bounces back in spring, but they can absolutely thrive in warmer climates when planted in a shady patch in the garden. But tropical conditions are probably going to be too hot for them to thrive, but it has been grown successfully before. It might just not be the easiest task. So even if your conditions aren't ideal, if you're up for a challenge, give it a go. You'll never know until you try. Though not too picky about soil conditions, Comfrey does appreciate a little bit more water and nitrogen than other herbs. A spot of water every day or two and nitrogen-rich fertilizer at the beginning of every season should be enough to keep Comfrey perfectly content. They can be grown from seeds, but even easier is to propagate them from cuttings. It's advisable to keep Comfrey in pots, because once you start harvesting the roots, Comfrey has a habit of multiplying like crazy. Every root shard becomes a brand new plant, and Comfrey seeds can spread fairly quickly. So if you like a well-organized garden, you might be wise to keep them contained and manageable. It is because of their proclivity that farmers usually sow them wildly in grazing fields. Once they take root, they're impossible to get rid of. And even if you did run a tractor over a Comfrey bush, it just encourages it to sprout in every place a root or twig landed, creating dozens of new bushes. To sum it up, Comfrey is an herbal powerhouse that is almost endless in its medicinal properties, both inside and out. Yes, it must be used responsibly due to its potential toxicity, but Comfrey could be a wonderful addition to your natural health toolkit. Do you think, like we do, that this absolute gem deserves more attention and deeper study? And have you ever used Comfrey before? Please tell us about your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any journeys through the fascinating world of medicinal herbs. Until then, stay curious and embrace the power of nature's pharmacy. Disclaimer: I am not a medical doctor. If you are on chronic medication, pregnant, or suffering from any health condition, please consult a medical professional. I am here to relay my own thoughts and opinions. My videos are entirely based on my own research and experiences.